Hello everyone, and welcome to another tender and nurturing episode of the Atheist Experience.
Aww.
I'm your host,
Those
Russell
are my
Glasser.
favorite shows.
I'm your host, Russell Glasser, and with me, of course, is Martin Wagner, longtime contributor to the show. Today is Sunday, May 10th, and it is Mother's Day.
That's
so
right.
As a public service announcement, if you still have a mother and are not totally alienated from her, then call her if you haven't already.
Unless she sort of sprang from an egg or something, just sort of from a patch of slime.
Right. Well, I should say if you still have a living mother.
Okay. Yeah.
But, you know, today is the one day a year when we devote time to answer that burning perennial question that people always insist on asking us, which is, if there is no God, then where did you come from? Well, the answer is
Mom!
that... Hi, Mom!
Hi!
I got chromosomes and stuff from my parents who got them from their parents and so on in an unbroken chain all the way back to the point where sexual reproduction first developed, and after that it gets a little bit more complicated, but you know, hey, who's counting? Remember, M is for the mixture of DNA that your biological forebears passed on to you.
Oh, stop.
O is for the ontological argument for God, and okay, I'll stop. Welcome to the Atheist Experience.
Welcome, everyone. Hi.
We are a live public access call-in show offering you people in and out of Austin the opportunity to interact with us atheists. The Atheist Experience is sponsored...
There's my boat right there. That's my boat.
The Atheist Experience is sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. You can find out more by visiting www.atheist-community.org. And when you do, be sure to check out the Frequently Asked Questions page for answers to common questions like that dumb one I just mentioned before. I think the most popular question for frequently asking on the show would be, wait a minute, what, huh? The show is live on Austin Public Access Channel 16 every Sunday from 4:30 to 6 p.m. Central Time. And if you're not local to Austin, as many people already watching know, you can still watch the show live as it happens by visiting the Atheist Experience site, www.atheist-experience.com. Then you can click on the live stream link. And even if you are local to Austin, go ahead and fire up that site anyway, because then you can get access to the chat room where hundreds of fans just like you will tune in live to offer running commentary and swat the occasional troll during the show. Also at the website, you will find audio and video from past episodes. If you click on Archive, you will find a list of programs that includes links to both audio and video downloads and a rapidly updated audio podcast. Now, traditionally, we have uploaded recent shows to Google Video, but I understand that Google Video has at this point closed off new submissions. I haven't been in the loop about what we're doing next, but I know that the people in the back are hard at work, so if it hasn't already happened, then check our website frequently and we'll get updated about how you can see the video of this show after it happens. In the meantime, watch it live, you bums. Or, you know, there's always the podcast. The audio is a perfectly acceptable way to listen to the show.
There are a lot of options that we could eventually end up doing. There's Hulu,
right?
There's I think Vimeo is also really good. But who knows? It's going to be up to the guys.
Well, yeah, I think they've already figured something out.
They just don't tell us these things.
Yeah, nobody cares about us. No. You can also enjoy shorter fan-selected clips of the Atheist Experience when you search YouTube. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio podcast called The Non-Prophets. You can visit www.nonprofitsradio.com, Prophets, for more information. And the next episode, there was an episode last week, there will be one more next week, Saturday, May 16th. We have weekly meetings for the Atheist Community of Austin, hosted at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road from 11:30 to 1 every Sunday, except for the first Sunday of the month when we host our lecture series at the Austin History Center, located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. Now, I actually have an actual lecture to report for next month.
Oh, good.
The next lecture will be held on June 7th, and according to the website, it will be former Texas State Science Director Chris Comer, who will talk to us about the state of science education in Texas.
Not good.
Not good.
That'll be a short lecture.
But good that we landed Chris Comer for our lecture.
Yes, yeah. And she had a very unfortunate situation when her lawsuit against, I think is it the Texas Education? Commission. Yeah, they got
something like that.
She, some of you who may or may not know the story, she was fired from her position. Was it Texas Education Agency or Commission? I can't remember exactly.
I don't
yeah.
really know.
Is it that, agency? Yeah. And
she was fired for being insufficiently butt-kissing towards intelligent design.
She was expelled because all she did was forward an email announcement.
I'm frightened, but I'm not going to let it stop me.
Yeah, very good. About a talk that the CFI Austin was sponsoring featuring Barbara Forrest, who has been on the front lines battling the whole ID and evolution fight. She just simply sent an email out saying, hey, this talk is happening, and you might like to attend because it might be interesting. And for this, she lost her job because apparently the policy is to remain neutral in the issue of
Do you have
science
any idea
versus
if Chris
creationism.
is still looking for a job?
Well, I don't know, but I'm sure that'll be one of the things she'll tell us. If
There's a lot of that going on.
she can come work for
these
us.
days.
Yeah. So it's a lot of interesting stuff happening on the educational front here in Texas. We've had Don McElroy, the creationist dentist who runs the State Board of Education, got his ass reamed in a hearing in front of a bunch of state senators, really got raked over the coals for, quote, creating a hornet's nest the likes of which we've never seen, to quote one of the senators who was essentially interrogating him about his appropriateness for that position, seeing as how he is very clearly a right-wing religious ideologue in the pocket of creationists and using his position along with a half dozen other young earth creationists on that board to advance a creationist agenda while saying, well, that's not really what we're doing. We're not really, we're just trying to be fair and balanced.
Nice.
Yeah. So it should be interesting. His confirmation vote, it's a position to be the chairman of the State Board of Education. He was appointed by Rick Perry, but he has to be, approved.
By the way, this is a total tangent, but when you mentioned fair and balanced, I, of course, always think of Fox News, and I've made the joke in the past that Fox News' slogan was fair and balanced, but not fair, balanced, and accurate. Guess what they did in a commercial?
They said
that? Fair, balanced, and accurate.
They're watching the show, I tell you. We're keeping them on there.
I don't know. I totally saw it on YouTube.
That's hilarious.
And of course, at first I thought it was a paradox, but then I realized that if you say
just
the statement is true, the statement can be either true or false without a contradiction.
Well, maybe you just sort of, you temporarily kind of phase shifted into an alternate universe where it wasn't a paradox, and that's really how,
Tangent. Enough beating up on Fox News. If you can't make it to the morning meetings, you can always join us for dinner right after this show, and you should, beginning at around 6:30 every Sunday. Most of the people involved with the production of the Atheist Experience, and we have a pretty large crowd tonight, head over to Threadgills in South Austin right after the show. The address is 301 West Riverside Drive near Barton Springs Road, and it's a great opportunity to meet with all of us and express your appreciation for the hard work that those other people that you don't see do. And as if our regular meetings, meals, lectures, television programs, and podcasts weren't enough, the AC also hosts an Atheist Happy Hour every Thursday beginning at around 7 p.m. at the Dog and Duck Pub located at the corner of 17th and Guadalupe. If you'd like to get in touch with us but don't feel like calling in, you can email us at tv@atheist-community.org. And the usual disclaimer, we love taking calls in-state and out-of-state, but we try to give priority to A, people who are in Texas, and B, people who don't agree with us. So email is the best way to get in touch and write your fan letter, and often we
it's not that we
reply to those.
don't love the folks who love us back. We think that's great, but we think that the what makes this show what it is are the people who want to call us up and get it really tussles. So don't be scared, theists. Call us up.
Okay. I have a few special announcements this week. Coming up this week in association with the Center for Inquiry, Kristen Harris, professor of neurobiology in the Center for Learning and Memory at UT, will present a lecture entitled How Learning Changes Synapses in Your Brain. This Saturday at 10 a.m. you can participate in the ACA's regular blood drive at the Blood and Tissue Center of Central Texas on 4300 North Lamar Boulevard. And then at 11 o'clock, same day, you can follow up with a group outing to pick up trash and help the greater community as the ACA participates in the Keep Austin Beautiful campaign. You can check the website calendar for more information about these scheduled events. And finally, personal sort of announcement. Next Monday, May 18th, you can take a moment to celebrate the life of a man whose existence and especially whose name has great significance to me. That would be atheist philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell. Yay, Bertrand.
Yay.
That's it.
Yeah.
If you're watching the video, if there is a video, those are the pause bars so you can skip the boring announcements. How are you doing, Martin?
I'm well. Yourself?
I'm as well as I could be expected to be. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a really upbeat.
I'm awesome.
Yeah, there you go. That's what we want to hear. No, there's something else. Don't forget. Last but not least, the Atheist Experience blog is very active and lots of fun.
How could I not have that on my announcement?
Because you're just But that's at blogspot.com, atheistexperience.blogspot.com, and we get a lot of readers and lots of back and forth on the comments.
Oh, huge!
And it's all kinds of fun.
Comments.
Yeah, all kinds of fun. You did a really great report last week on that absurd creationist Michael Shermer.
I didn't finish
debate.
it. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Did it just get too
finish writing the
depressing to
report.
write about?
No, what happened is we wound up talking about it on the nonprofits, and
okay.
I didn't feel like going over it again. So listen to last week's episode of the nonprofits, and you'll hear the rest of what that write-up would have been.
Maybe you can put a little like streaming bar for that episode on the blog. If there's such a thing can
I
be
will
done.
I will put a new post linking to that episode.
There we go. Good. Cool.
All right.
Yes. All right.
So, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I thought, Moo, you have to get down now. I thought that, I usually come on the show and I don't have anything prepared and I'm just like, let's take calls, and that's fun to do. All kinds of
Okay.
fun. But we actually, just to let people know, we do read our emails. We got a couple of requests, I think, within the last week or two for people asking us to talk about a popular argument among apologists, which is the Kalam Cosmological argument.
That's a big William Lane Craig argument.
That's one of William Lane Craig's favorites, and so I thought I might, do some reading up on it and talk about it just a little bit on the show. Not spend too long with it because it is one of those theological arguments that can get so in depth you can literally spend an entire show without taking any calls, just talking about it and picking it apart. And but it's interesting, and it is an interesting argument. But I'm just going to touch on some of the basics of it, what some of the more common criticisms are, and then if you really are interested in knowing more about it, if it's one that you've been hearing from a lot of theists and apologists that you've been talking to who bring it up, you can Google it and find out some more of the objections to it. But essentially, what's interesting, first off, about the Kalam cosmological argument is that what Craig has done is he's taken this old Muslim dialectic from, the 9th century.
Really?
And he's just sort of rescued it from the trunk and dusted it off, and he's sort of revived it as an argument that he wants to use for...
Before we even talk about Kalam, maybe you should clarify what cosmological arguments are in general.
Well, they essentially attempt to determine why there is anything. Why is there a universe at all? Why, how did it get here? What was the initial cause of everything, if there was in fact a cause? Obviously, theologians and apologists want to argue that there was and that there had to have been a cause, and this cause necessarily is the Christian God.
Right. Another word for it is first cause argument, which is, in the non-Kalam form, I guess people say everything has a cause, except for there has to be something that doesn't have a cause. Right. Therefore, we'll call it God, which was the first thing.
Right. Now, that's Paley's argument from the early 1800s, which is a very simplified sort of thing where he essentially structured it that way. Okay, right. Well, everything has to have a cause, so we'll just say that's God. And then he came up with the watchmaker analogy to sort of helpfully illustrate that.
What I like about that argument is that it contains its own refutation.
Yes.
Because first it says everything has to have a cause, and then it says there must be something without a cause. Those two things can't both be true. If we grant that there's something without a cause, then we no longer have the need to describe why something has a first cause. We just don't have the first premise anymore.
And his little watchmaker analogy refutes itself in a similar way.
Yeah.
Because the whole structure of that is, imagine you're walking through the woods, or along a beach, or in a desert, or in some sort of locale, right, where it's just all nature around you. And you see a watch on the ground, and you go, my goodness, how did that get there? You know, obviously, well, you know, what it goes on to say is, well, obviously this can't be some natural artifact, it must have been made.
Right.
But then it tries to extrapolate that to everything around you.
Yes.
When the whole way in which, in the context of the analogy, you're able to tell that the watch is not an artifact of nature is that you can distinguish the two things.
Right.
You can distinguish nature from the watch. You can tell, well, this had to have been something made. Well, how do you know that it was something made?
And they like
compared
to, say,
what? You have
like
to have a frame of
say
reference.
that it's the complexity that makes it clear that that it must have been designed. But actually, I mean, things that are very simple look designed. Like, for instance, a rubber ball. Geometrically is a lot simpler than a rock.
Yeah.
But you know, but it looks like a design thing because it's so regular.
Yeah.
Like, not because it's so complicated.
Yeah. And then there's the whole problem of falsifiability then with that question of, well, what would a non-God designed thing look like?
Right.
You know, how would it operate? Yeah, and these are a whole lot of questions that can't get answered that way simply because Paley's first cause argument is so simplistic and he didn't really think it through. The Kalam Cosmological argument is a great deal more sophisticated than that, but I think it contains the seeds of its own refutation, ultimately. Because essentially
I've always thought that the Kalam argument is not that much more sophisticated. It just uses a lot of obfuscation to make the matter sound more confusing than it really is.
It does do that, but the way in which it's more sophisticated is that I think it comes from a slightly, more, shall we say, more educated comprehension of, say, notions of time and causality than what Paley was working with, I think. I'm not saying that they're any more correct, but I'm saying that at least, it's not the kind of thing that any old numbskull could come up with.
Okay.
The problem is that, and this has been pointed out by a number of critics of the argument, and a really good article that you can read on this is on the Internet Infidels website at infidels.org, and James Still has written it, where he talks about the problem with the concepts of time that William Lane Craig is trying to use in the Kalam Cosmological
one thing at
argument.
a time. What's the Kalam Cosmological
Okay, well, first off, the Kalam Cosmological argument, it can be sort of summed up, very simple syllogism, like Paley's. It says, everything that begins to exist must have had a cause. And that's very specific phrasing there. Everything that begins to exist.
Specific enough to do an end run around the whole everything has a cause.
Right. And then he goes on to say, so that's premise one. Premise two is the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore the universe had a cause. Okay. Now, setting aside the obvious problem that, I'm sort of putting the cart before the horse there, which is that there's no point in the argument where, that cause necessarily has to be the biblical God.
Right.
But,
or any intelligence.
Precisely. One of the problems that Still points out in the way that Craig structures the argument, and this has also been pointed out by some other people of a more mathematical bent, is that there are essentially two ideas of time at work here. Okay. Craig is more or less saying that infinity is impossible, right? And this is kind of something that's sort of brought up in, Matt has talked about Zeno's paradox before on the show, where you have in a causal, time sense, in what's called absolute time, where everything's like this strict chain of causal events,
right,
as we understand time. You can't really have infinity because Zeno's paradox points out like this: if you have this infinite series of events going on all the way back, you can never really get to now.
I've talked about this actually.
Yeah.
Zeno's paradox talks about infinite subdivisions of a finite length, whereas talking about time as infinite actually talks about time like extending an infinite distance backwards. So it's not quite the same, but
but there's similar problems that kind of come up with when you sort of like start scratching your head and thinking about what the ramifications of it are.
Sure.
But Craig's whole point is that in absolute time, infinity is impossible because just an infinite chain of events going back. Can't really do that. So therefore, the universe, being temporal, had to have begun
Yes.
at a certain stage. Now,
well, I think usually when I hear this argument, what they say is, okay, we both agree that the universe began because because science now knows that there's a Big Bang.
right.
Which is hilarious because creationists are the ones who have most often denied the Big Bang thing. But yeah, so now they've embraced it and taken credit for it.
But they just want to claim that it can't possibly be a result of natural processes. But there's another concept of time. Now, absolute time was Newtonian. Another concept of time that, according to Still's article, Leibniz first advanced, and then Einstein worked at this, is the concept of relational time. Whereas you really don't get time happening at all unless there are bodies in motion, unless there are things relating to other things, unless stuff is doing stuff.
Right.
If there's nothing around doing anything, well, then there's no time, more or less. It's funky.
Hence the concept of space-time.
Space-time.
Where the stuff and the time are sort of intertwined with each other.
Right, and that's, that can be called relational time because it's based on the relationship of objects to other objects, things happening to other things, that sort of thing. Now, what Still points out is that Craig seems to agree with the notion of relational time, simply because he says that in absolute time, that's what his whole premise is based on. In absolute time, if time is just this strict causal chain of events, you can't get an infinity. Okay. So he seems to agree with the notion of relational time. But then, in order to argue for his God as the creator, he does the same sort of, flipping the switch that we saw Matt Slick do in the tag argument, the transcendental argument for God, where he spends the whole argument saying, well, logical absolutes cannot be contingent upon minds, flip, except for this one mind.
Yeah.
Right? Well, here...
Special exception.
Well, because in order to argue for God being, the creator of the universe, creation being a causal activity... suddenly he's back to absolute time.
You could actually generalize this by summing up a whole lot of creationist arguments as there is some rule which always applies, but it can't always apply. So let's make up something that gets special permission to break the rules and call it God.
It becomes this extremely elaborate and ornate thing that just couches another special pleading fallacy at the end of the day. And so essentially, Craig spends most of the argument seems to be this agreement with the notion of relational time over absolute time. But then, when it comes to the point that he needs a God to be the thing that is responsible for creating the universe, suddenly it's back to absolute time again, because God had to have been doing this causal thing to do his magic stuff and make a universe happen. So there's kind of a self-refuting. A difficulty with Craig's whole premise. Another thing with Craig's premise is that, again, they fail because he has to assume knowledge of conditions at the beginning of the universe. That we don't have that knowledge. And I don't really think we can have that knowledge. We can have a lot of knowledge going back pretty far. I think we can trace the origins of the universe back to, when it was more or less the size of a kumquat, but we can't really get beyond that, and we don't know what sort of physical conditions were in play. That led to the creation, and when you want to start talking about, okay, well, God did this, but then God doesn't have to obey these rules because he's outside space-time, then the same problem arises. Well, then how can you say anything about how God operates?
Right. And anyway, if there's stuff outside space-time that's influencing this universe, that's kind of part of the concept of universe. I always say that part of the problem with these cosmological arguments is that they rely on a very fuzzy definition of what universe means. Because we can say universe as the sum of all things that exist.
Right.
In which case God would actually be part of the universe by that term. Or we could also say universe as in a science fiction story where there are thousands of parallel universes, you can refer to this universe as one particular universe. And that's kind of the concept of the thing that they're talking about as having been created. There's a universe, but there's also stuff outside the universe, which could be also encompassed by a word universe in the sense of sort of a mathematical complete set.
Yeah, and that's a problem that I always find crops up when you start hearing apologists talking about, well, outside the universe, not reliant upon space. And he gets to this God who gets to break all the rules because he's sort of outside and beyond all of this sort of thing. Well, then how can you say anything meaningful about it at all? How can you really know? How can you know how a being like that operates?
Yeah.
And how is it sensible to talk about this being who transcends space-time and yet always seems to be doing this stuff within space-time, seems to be doing all this causal activity like universe creating, right? So that's, again, that's another, all of these sort of self-contradicting things that you keep being batted back and forth just within the structures of these little arguments really create a problem for the conclusion, which is to say that this necessarily had to have happened as the result of a God doing stuff because it couldn't have happened any other way.
Yeah.
When you haven't really established that God is anything that you can say anything meaningful about at all.
Right.
Except to say, well, here are all these conditions that need to be in place for the universe to exist. And so in order for the universe to exist, I'm just going to posit this God who doesn't have to obey any of those rules.
And which, of course, requires no explanation.
Yeah.
I mean, we have this thing which is in principle infinitely more complicated than the universe, and yet I thought you said complicated things need an explanation. Oh, well, God doesn't need one. He's just outside of time. There, problem solved.
Yeah. So that is, so again, that's the Reader's Digest version. That just shows a lot of problems with these sorts of logical arguments that apologists have been advancing, just like the transcendental argument for God and the Kalam Cosmological argument. The premises themselves are not really rooted in anything that is as solid as the apologist seems to think they are. They assume knowledge of conditions that we just don't have knowledge of, that they can't really have knowledge of. And they want to kind of have it both ways. They want to have a God that is able to do causal, that necessarily utilizes a causal process to create a universe, but at the same time, he gets to avoid those rules. He gets to not be a God who exists within absolute time. He can be beyond all of that. Well, how can he be both? He's magic. That's what it really boils down to in the end. So
okay.
So, but if you want to learn more about this, there's this. I mean, this was literally just scratching the surface of the whole thing. There are lots of critiques, lots of interesting articles and papers online that you can read about this. You can read some of Craig's rebuttals to his critics, and then their counter rebuttals and all that sort of stuff. Really makes for some good reading on infidels.org and otherwise. So just Google it. Google the subject if you're interested in it, as well as some of the other theological arguments for God, like TAG, like Transcendental Argument for God, and some of the others, because it's really worthwhile reading.
All right. We have one caller lined up. This is a live call-in show, and right here is the number if you are watching live. Under you. And if you don't see it, then you might be watching a rerun, in which case we don't want you to call the studio. And I got a couple news stories that I can use as backup in case we don't get enough callers. But in the meantime, let's go to Eric in Jacksonville, North Carolina.
Hello.
Hi, Eric.
How are you?
All right. Thanks.
I called in today because I recently, with my family, went to go to a graduation of a couple of my cousins in across state in North Carolina. And when I got there, everything was fine. Everything was great. I hadn't seen them in a long time. And by the time we actually got to the graduation ceremony, we were kind of biding time, waiting for it to happen, and we just were discussing various things. And my father, who had always kind of been against my atheism, been against my political pursuits, like the Zeitgeist movement and stuff like that, and he basically got into this argument. In order to explain myself, I said, well, first and foremost, I'm an atheist. And my cousin, Emily, basically said, whoa, you're an atheist? What? And she couldn't believe it. And she said, how are you an atheist? And the first thing out of my mouth was said, well, it's the only rational decision I can come to. And my aunt, from like 5 feet away, looked at me with this terrible grimace and said, no, it's not. And you just completely disagreeing with me. Mm-hmm. And so my cousin and I, who happens to be some sort of apologetic, she's really into that kind of apologetic movement, trying to explain, trying to get people involved in Christianity and stuff like that. And we got into a little debate, and the only argument that I could really present, because she got into the evolution, how do you explain all that, and I told her everything I could until getting to the whole, I'm not an expert in biochemistry, so I can't really explain to you how certain processes in the cell work. And so I basically explained to her that it was kind of like a gods of the gaps kind of thing, where she was basically making the excuse that if she couldn't explain something or she couldn't find someone to explain it to her, then it was, God must have done it. Mm-hmm. So the only argument that I could get her to kind of see from my perspective was the moral argument. And when I say that, I don't mean like some transcendental thing like where do we get our morals, but it was more like we get our morals from our parents and that kind of stuff. And the only thing that waned her kind of assault on my ideals, not necessarily, it wasn't an aggressive one, it was more of a discussion, but the only one that kind of halted her in her progression was where do we get our morals from? And that kind of intrigued me, because to anyone who can think, like, where do you get your morals? And I asked her, like, did your parents tell you to not steal because it was bad and you didn't want anyone to steal from you, or because it was an affront to God and you go to hell for it? It was breaking one of the Ten Commandments. And I guess I'm ranting. I'm sorry.
No, that's interesting. So what's your question?
I was just a comment. It was kind of a comment on how depressing it is at times that the people you love the most sometimes can be so uneducated in certain fields and have such kind of delusions, like Richard Dawkins just expresses a lot in his books and in his lectures. Mm-hmm. It's kind of depressing, and I don't really see a way that, well, I don't want to be pessimistic, but I don't see a way that everyone can come to the same conclusion like overnight or maybe in the span of 5 years. It's kind of like something we'll have to really fight with over the next century or so. It's kind of depressing. I don't know a better word for it.
Yeah. I this topic is a little close to home because a good friend of mine recently came out to her mother and had to deal with all this same kind of stuff.
Right.
Let me see. Okay.
Which is interesting. That's just something. I mean, the fact that when you simply say to your parents or family members or loved one, I just don't believe in God, right? And that would cause some of them to react as if you just said, I just ate a baby, Goes to show you how powerful the lock is that religion has on the hearts and minds of most people. Christianity and religion in general has simply convinced the majority of the human race that if you don't have this, if you don't have me, this wonderful thing called religion, and then insert the name of whatever religion you subscribe to.
Right.
You're just that's the worst thing you can be, and so it's that bit of programming that you have to get around. And perhaps one way, I didn't mean to barge in here, but I was just going to say, I always do, right? Because barging in is what I do so well.
Oh, go ahead.
That's what you're here for.
No, just to say that, the first thing that you can always point out when, you say that and they're just like, just go, but wait a minute. I mean, have I suddenly become a different person to you?
Mm-hmm.
Am I still just the same? I mean,
I'm not any different than I was 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, I mean, am I still Eric? Right? Am I still Martin?
Yeah.
I mean, just that's, and then that initial shock, because that's just reflexive, right? That's the limbic system kicking in when they recoil, and then hopefully you can engage them at that point. But
right now, of course, I'm fortunate to have wonderful parents. Hi, Mom. Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Call your mothers, you lazy bastards. I'm grateful.
Who who is not exactly an atheist, but has never been a traditional religious person. So I've never gone through this, but I've observed a lot of people dealing with their parents. And in my observation, like they say, time heals all wounds, or sometimes they say time wounds all heals. But it seems to me that the initial tension lasts for maybe a year or several years at most. And, you know, I don't want to downplay how uncomfortable that is, but often it looks to me like people's families eventually come to grips with those things. And also, also I want to say that it's not really your job to make people atheists. It's not our job to make people atheists either.
That's not why we're here.
You know, you live in North Carolina. Martin and I live in Texas. We don't have like representative samples of everyone in the country, right? We live
Sadly,
in
no.
we live in some of the more Bible-y areas. You know, so you may not see the perspective necessarily that atheism as an accepted philosophical position, I think, has been growing rapidly in the last several years.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's all these. The news is full of all these recent reports that people are, abandoning traditional religion in droves. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're rejecting all religion completely. They're not all suddenly just deconverting and becoming atheists overnight. But a lot of what has been traditional religion, in this country, just go to church Sunday morning and do your thing. That's not been. They're getting away from that because they're sort of seeing those, ways in which religion manifests itself as being, they're equating it with intolerance, ignorance, and there's this whole young generation of people coming up saying, well, I'm okay with God, but why do they all have to like bash the gays and stuff? And so that kind of getting away from it all, I think there's a seed there that you can, if you want to sort of deliver the message that atheism is a viable alternative. There's at least a receptiveness there. But yeah, you're seeing the numbers are dwindling in terms of people who are really, yes, I'm Christian, identifying that way.
Yeah,
they're still
not only
huge,
are
but
slightly more people identifying as completely non-religious, but the extreme religious zealot wing is gradually losing ground to the more let's say kinder, gentler, liberal religious wing.
Right.
It seems to me, I mean, they still yell and scream, but I think they are, I think they're on an inevitable course where they're losing influence.
Well, yeah, especially with like not the destruction, but like the removal of their most prominent leaders, like I don't know, Ted Haggard, the controversy that he had, Ken Hovind, and all these big names that kind of stand out and are representative for their individual beliefs, and they're getting shot down by things that happen to all of us. It's both a boon and a bane to their movement, their pursuit of their religion.
Yeah, and of course those people were always ridiculous. It wasn't about having gay sex. It's just that people are, more hip to the fact that they're ridiculous now. And I think if this show does have an overriding goal, I think one of them, in my opinion, should definitely be to encourage making fun of blowhards like that.
Well, yeah, and that's, we certainly, don't hold back on that score. But what's important to note is that those guys and people like them still do have their followers. They're still great in number. And the reason those people still follow, guys like Haggard and Hovind and Benny Hinn and people like
now.
that.
I mean,
well, no, what is he? He's selling insurance now or something like that.
Is he?
But
that is.
But he's completely heterosexual.
Yes.
That's good on you, Ted. But he's not the pastor there anymore, but he still has his people who are like, oh, well, God's forgiven. They're making the excuses, right?
Kent Hovind, you wrote a blog post like, what is it now?
2 years ago. 2 years ago.
Kent Hovind went to jail for tax evasion?
Yeah.
And for some reason, people still show up on our blog and comment on that thread saying, oh, how could you be so horrible and cruel to this good
After
godly
2 years,
man?
we will every once in a while get some nut bar, who is just convincing. They always make the same sort of arguments that we're big meanies, and somehow we're responsible for we're in the wrong somehow for putting these recordings of his jail phone calls up on, posting those up on the blog. You know, newsflash.
We didn't even record them.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
They're
The
not even
jails,
posted on our site.
prisoners don't have that kind of privacy. All phone calls are recorded, right? You don't have a right to privacy when
yeah.
you're in the pen. Okay.
Also
And,
on that note, it's kind of those people that do make those comments about, you know, even if it's a comment that's not, you know, pleading and derogatory towards some other person, but if it's something about something that happened years ago and they act like it's happening today, that just kind of goes to stand that they don't have, well, not that they don't have the intellectual capacity, but they don't think things through. They don't have the critical thinking reasoning to look at it and analyze everything about it before putting like their names in the line, essentially, towards an argument or, you know, stuff like that. It just goes to show, like,
you know, everybody makes mistakes. I mean, I've been on atheist boards where somebody will accidentally reply to a post that's over 5 years old. So
exactly,
Yeah. But I think he was talking just in terms more of why folks like that, you know, why guys like Kent Hovind still have defenders.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
well, again, you have to, first off, you're right, it's not an intellectual process with them, it's an emotional one. And it's, and then there's also the fact that the religion in general, but I think especially the more fundamentalist you get and the more strident you get in your beliefs, these belief systems do not provide their followers with the proper cognitive tools to do basic things like distinguish reality from fantasy.
Well, it's reactionary, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, when you have a faith-based point of view, then you tend to think, okay, the things that I believe as right and wrong are handed down from on high. And so they can't really go through the mental process of, oh, new evidence has come to light. It looks like this guy was really kind of a weasel.
Right.
So instead of doing that, I mean, you know, they have to cling more tightly to you know, to just having faith and believing that this ultimate standard of Kent Hovind as a good defender of Christianity still holds, and therefore all the rest of us must be just out to get them.
Yeah.
I actually heard something awesome from something Dan Barker wrote recently.
Okay.
He said, you know how often people will talk to us and then say in the end, oh, well, talking to you has just strengthened my faith. Have you ever come across that?
Yeah, we have.
He said, if you hear that, you win. Because by saying that they've had to bolster their faith, they've acknowledged that you've taken away their reasons for believing what they believe.
Yeah.
We had someone one of them comment on that Kent Hovind blog post saying exactly that sort of thing.
Strengthen my faith.
You've strengthened my faith, and I'm like, look, if your religious faith has been strengthened by the fact that we are out there criticizing a man for committing felonies, then you're welcome to your faith. Okay, that you can have that kind of faith if that's what you think is a good thing. So yeah.
Okay, well, we've got more calls lined up.
Yeah.
So
Okay, good, very good.
Okay, so but we appreciate hearing from you, Eric. It's very interesting, and just keep stick it out with your family.
good luck with your family.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So long.
All right.
Next we have
Joey has
Joey
been waiting
in
patiently.
Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I really can't decipher what it says the topic is. So what's up, Joey?
Hey guys, what's going on?
We're good.
Ah,
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah. Hi guys.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, you there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah. You're on.
Okay, cool.
You're on TV.
I'm an ex-fundamentalist Christian, and I'm a big fan of the
Congratulations.
show. You guys have really helped me out, sort of work things out, so appreciate that. And I would just like to have you guys comment on 2 points, and I can just take my question off the air when I'm done.
Okay.
All
Sure.
right.
Okay. So the first is there's this idea in Christianity that it's a relationship with Christ, in that prayer is a method of strengthening that relationship and sort of developing oneself in Christ. And you guys, I think Matt, have previously stated that prayer sort of violates this idea of free will, because in praying you're sort of asking God to intercede on humanity's behalf and sort of be active. And I agree. But most fundamentalists would say that prayer is the acknowledgement of God's will and the willingness to do so. And if you guys could just comment on that, that'd be great. And the second question is, you've also stated in the past that the story of Jephthah's sacrifice of his daughter is a form of human sacrifice, and again, I agree. But modern Christians sort of rationalize this by saying that this is a story that is a lesson about making promises with God and being really careful that you're not going to make the wrong promise, or you know, you might lose something pretty important.
And they sort of say that Jephthah wouldn't have had to sacrifice his daughter had he not made that promise in the first place. And if you guys could please comment on those 2 points, I'll be happy to take my call off the air. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Okay.
Joey.
Yeah, it's not like when it's not like when somebody promises to sacrifice somebody that God would do something obvious like jump out of the bushes and say, oh, actually you don't need to sacrifice that person at all. Oh, wait, didn't he do that to, I'm sorry.
Isaac, Abraham?
Isaac,
Yeah.
yes, Abraham.
It's, what kind of it's funny. I mean, it's just sort of all of these things in the Bible that point to God being a real jerk, right? And Christians are like, uh-oh, okay, well, that's just a story. It's a metaphor.
The most interesting attempt I've heard to rationalize away the story of Jephthah is actually somebody who nitpicks the wording of the Bible and says, oh, it didn't actually say he killed her. It just said he did what he had promised. And then they make a big deal about her, like, bewailing her virginity, but not her impending death.
Oh, I see.
And so it was like, actually...
So that just makes it all better.
If you read between the lines, she actually like went off and joined a nunnery or something. Or I mean, she became celibate, and that's what that was the sad thing.
So it's all back down to the old "you're not interpreting the Bible properly" thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most extreme cases of biblical reinterpretation I ever saw, because when I went back over the passage, it says he promised to sacrifice the first thing that came through his door, and then it says the first thing that came through his door was her, and then it says he did what he promised. I mean, I know that you can kind of screw around with with metaphors and stuff, but if the Bible is that badly written, then you really shouldn't be going on it as a guide anyway.
Or especially if it like says things very clearly, but then doesn't mean what it says.
Yeah, it means the opposite of what it says.
Yeah. But this is fascinating. You will hear a lot of Christians argue for the Bible is a source of morality, God is a source of morality, right? And then they have to do all of this intellectual gerrymandering when you suddenly wave the Bible at them and say, well, here's an example of your God doing something amazingly immoral, right?
Yeah.
What's interesting is they know that's to be the case, right?
Of course they do.
This is a very wrong thing to do. So, but they can't just cross that line to say.
I would argue that if somebody went in not knowing anything about what biblical morality meant and not having the context of all this, what liberal Christians say, man-made religion, if they just went in and read the freaking Bible and read it as meaning what it appeared to mean, you could not get away from the conclusion that God that God supported this promise of human sacrifice.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why is the story even in there? Why bother bringing it up?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't have this literalistic reading of the Bible, then, I mean, there's the only real way to come at this morality that you guys want to have is to filter it through the things that you already understand from society and from your upbringing are good and bad. And that's the only reason why you would reinterpret the Bible to say, oh, that passage doesn't really say what it says. It really says this thing that makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
You're not getting your morality from the Bible.
No, you're attempting to make the Bible's very immoral passages, passages that you know to be morally dubious at best, and you're trying to shoehorn them into a morality that you know to be contemporary and secular and stuff that you have simply gotten from your day-to-day life. In this day and age, if you were to a parent to agree to kill their own child for any reason, it would be a monster. And so in order to make
But it's right there in the Bible.
But if it happens in the Bible, okay, then it's got to be okay in some context. Therefore, I simply have to contrive the context, through all sorts of, mental gymnastics. All right. Oh, that's right. He also wanted us to talk briefly about, the personal relationship Christians think they have to God.
I'll defer to you on that. I don't know anything.
Oh, well, for the very brief time in my life that I was a Christian, I can't ever claim to have felt that way. But having been in that environment some, I think I kind of know what it's about. I think that it's, maybe it's just a very simple form of psychology that makes people always want to believe that you have a parent, so that looking over your shoulder, watching after you, keeping you safe. It's a bit of emotional comfort. And I think it's one way in which Christians attempt to distinguish their religion from other religions. In fact, I hear that many times from a lot of Christians. It's like, oh, all those other religions are religions, right? But Christianity is not really a religion. Christianity is a relationship, and so it's more along.
I can't think of any other relationship where believing that the target of your relationship exists is contingent on having a relationship of faith.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody else I know, my son, my friends, my parents, every other relationship, pretty much the being acquainted with this person came before the relationship.
Yeah, yeah. It's
as an actual real thing that exists.
Never said it made sense, Russell. That's just kind of how they do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, shall we talk to Casey?
Sure.
Unless you need
Or
to do something else
maybe,
first.
I don't know, I'm wondering about Floyd there.
No, Casey's been.
All right, Casey.
10 minutes is long enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Casey, you got it.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
We're great.
Fine.
Well, basically, I just wanted to really thank you guys because at first, I was a real big Christian, and my sister, my twin sister actually, came out with her, actually, faith or lack thereof, recently.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, me and my friends thought that was the most evilest thing ever. And this past few weeks, I had been an atheist, and your show has really helped me.
Thank you.
If that makes sense.
That's our favorite thing to hear ever.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Not necessarily that we made you an atheist, but that we were there for support.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
All right.
Anything else you want to talk about? Ask us.
No, I think I'm good for now.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thanks for calling, Casey.
Thank you for calling, Casey.
Well, thank you for talking to me.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. I'm going to go to Floyd, and then I would actually like to read some of the new stuff I brought
Okay.
today. It shouldn't take too long when I do. But Floyd in Blue Springs, which
Missouri.
one is MO? There's so
Missouri.
many M states. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes, hello.
Floyd,
Floyd.
Hi. You're on.
How you doing, guys?
We're good.
Good.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I just wanted to say you guys do a great job with it. I've been watching for a while now.
Thank you.
Well, this came to my story about the flagellum. A friend told me about the case for a creator.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I went into a BioLife to donate for plasma, and I'm sitting down reading my book. I was actually reading Richard Dawkins at the time.
Okay.
And this other guy comes and sits down next to me, and it kind of seemed human. So I was like, I said hi to him, and he said, I got to get some studying done. And I'm like, studying for what? And he's going to go to a religious institution.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, and I picked up my book, I showed him my book, and we both kind of laughed at it a second. He's like, oh, so you're an atheist. Well, I'm not actually an atheist. I just like to take the standpoint and the viewpoint from everybody at the time. So that was the story for that. But I wanted to go on to the question about the flagellum. He took me a case for the creator, and I started watching that, and it's about the bacteria flagellum.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically say that Darwinism would be completely outruled if the flagellum or any type of organism was intelligently designed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, that's sort of a tautology, right?
Yeah.
I mean, well, actually it wouldn't, because a lot of people believe in evolution and a God at the same time.
Yeah, they're theistic evolutionists who believe that God just sort of put the basic building blocks of life here on Earth and then just let evolution do its thing. And
Right, so even that's not actually true, but go
Yeah.
on.
Anyway.
Right. So it goes on to say that it seems like in the actual movie that they do believe in somewhat of evolution.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
With the flagellum, though, they're saying that since it has a rotor, it has a propeller,
Yeah.
and it has a motor inside of the bacteria, that is like an actual put there that couldn't have been naturally selection
Yeah,
or come into existence through
Yeah.
evolution.
Yes, you may. Okay.
There is a lot of stuff. I mean, people have leaned a lot on the flagellum because basically Michael Behe, who is the sort of biochemistry arm of the intelligent design movement, and I always say the smartest guy in intelligent design, which is a low bar. Michael Behe used that as one of the cornerstones of his book, the Darwin's Black Box. If you look up reviews for Darwin's Black Box, you can find a lot of critical stuff dealing with his science, probably including a blog post that I wrote in 1999 after I read the book. But rather than just plug these things, let me briefly touch on the problem with irreducible complexity. And this has showed up over and over again, including the crushing defeat that the intelligent design movement had in 2005 with the case of Kitzmiller versus Dover. You should read the ruling on that. It's pretty good.
I might do that.
Okay, the flagellum thing basically hinges on this idea of irreducible complexity, which means that there are parts and you couldn't take any of them away without making the whole thing completely useless.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction. Behe says if you take one element out of the the flagellum's little rotary tail, right? If you take it's made up of all these little complex parts, right? You take one out, the whole thing doesn't work. The whole thing doesn't work.
Right, and
nothing functions.
And then he says he lists a number of systems, including the flagellum, which he claims to be irreducibly complex. And then he says, therefore, they couldn't have evolved. Now, even without getting into the specifics of how the flagellum did evolve, which much smarter people in that field than I am have tackled, if you look into it. Even skipping that, the argument is basically flawed, doesn't work, because there's more ways to get an evolutionary pathway than just adding a part at a time. An example that's used often is an arch. When you're building an arch, if you have a piece of architecture which is shaped like an arch, it's got two sides and it's got a top. If you remove the top, then the sides will fall down. If you remove the sides, then the top will fall down. So this would be an example of an irreducibly complex system. And yet, obviously, it was built a piece at a time. It wasn't just, some arches are actually constructed on the ground and then lifted. But, but a lot of arches aren't. And what they do with this is something called scaffolding, where they actually build up some struts and stuff that hold up the top first. And then they lower the top onto the sides from the struts. And then, I'm not an architect, I'm not sure I'm getting this right, but this is a general idea. And then here's the key thing, they remove the scaffolding. So in other words, similarly, evolution can not only add things, it can also take things away. And sometimes you find that in an evolutionary path, there are parts that just evolved away because they weren't needed anymore. So now the whole system is dependent on each one of its parts. But there was a time in the past when there were redundant systems holding up that arch, so to speak.
And that's why the intelligent design side is wrong.
So there was some kind of outside force or something that was structured before.
Yeah, not an outside force, just another evolutionary feature which was initially necessary, and then as more parts showed up, it became redundant and went away.
And this is why they're wrong about the bacterial flagellum's tail. Ken Miller, who is one of the leading biologists in the country, he's been a professor at Brown University for 30 years. He's authored the most widely used biology textbook in schools around the country. And he also happens to be a Catholic. So that kind of, throws cold water on the whole, fundamentalist argument that, only atheists accept evolution.
And therefore he gets a disproportionate amount of attention from the champions of science.
But the point is, Ken Miller has demonstrated that this is exactly the case with the development of the bacterial flagellum and its tail, is that there is part of the rotary structure inside this little supposedly irreducibly complex system. Remember, Behe's whole point was if you take one element out of the whole system, the whole thing doesn't work. Well, here, there's part of the rotor in the part of the little rotary tail which consists of 40 individual elements. You can take that out, And that, essentially, prior to its developing into the flagellum and its tail, this little gizmo, this little natural bit of it did something else. It performed a different function.
Right. Yeah. This is actually an example of co-adaptation,
Yeah.
where something may have evolved for one purpose, but then I mean purpose I use loosely, but then turned out to be useful for something else and got sort of assimilated into other parts of the body because oh, this works as a motor. It makes the thing this parts move faster.
And so that's a lot of what you see in these systems that are supposedly, according to the ID side, irreducibly complex. Well, now you take the little bits apart, and before they came together to be the thing that they are, they all did different stuff than they do now. Once they evolved and developed into a much larger unit, well, now they rely on each other to do that thing. Now they're, they can't function as anything else, but there was a gradual stage to get to that point.
Okay.
So you can go online. You can Google Kenneth Miller bacterial flagellum, and
I'll do that.
And you'll get his article where he explains it very clearly. So he's a college professor, so he knows how to make these difficult scientific ideas, easy to understand, and it's worth reading.
Yeah, I'll check that out. Well, I also think in the case of Creator, they were saying that, I know you guys are saying there was some type of architecture before, but he was saying that all these parts came together as one.
You mean all at the same time?
Yes, as far as
He has no evidence of that. It's just one of those things creationists like to say because it sounds like a god.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of biologists would probably disagree with that, that it's evolution's a continuum, and things happen just, it's not all, this one event, this, one specific time in which suddenly there was nothing and suddenly there was this complex animal, bip, as if it beamed down from the Enterprise. It doesn't really work that way. It's a gradual process.
And I could see that, it was a creation of beauty and stuff.
But anyway, read up on
hope
the stuff.
that helps.
Yeah.
I think we'll be moving on to the next caller, but thanks for calling, Floyd.
Okay,
Sure.
can I say one more thing for the internet crowd out there?
All right.
They were talking about zeitgeist
Yes.
and how it's been completely unproven. Well, things with zeitgeist, it has changed. Their depths were changing in social change, and they take that into account.
Okay,
so.
sorry. No, you can't use the show to promote Zeitgeist. We think it's nonsense. And we're going to get lots of emails saying that we censored him. No. But anyway, tough.
No, I'm sure he's an earnest guy, and
yes.
If you want to, do we have a stock response to Zeitgeist? Which
look it up on the blog, Atheist Experience Zeitgeist. If you Google those terms together, you'll find it.
So, but thanks anyway.
We got. I was going to go to news, but apparently Kenny can prove that God exists.
Or he'd like to give it a shot anyway.
So we're always interested in that. So Kenny, Santa Barbara, California, you're up.
Kenny, hi,
hey.
you're on the air.
Hey, okay. I define proof as, I give an argument, and if you can't logically and scientifically refute it, then you have to accept it. Is that okay? Do we agree on that?
No, that's not proof.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
that doesn't.
I know that's not the definition of proof.
Well, look.
Do we agree on that? Do you have to refute it logically and scientifically?
I just said no.
Well, yeah, but let's hear what it is. Let's hear what you got.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. When you trace all the way back to the expansion of the universe, you get what you call a singularity, which constitutes a boundary to space-time itself.
This is actually
It
topic.
marks the
No.
Go on.
We're
Sorry.
listening.
It marks the beginning of the universe, and the Big Bang model describes the universe as not being eternal. Since there is a beginning point to the universe, we can conclude that there was a cause for the beginning. This type of cause would have to possess a number of properties. As a cause of space and time, this cause would have to transcend space and time and exist non-temporally and non-spatially, at least without the universe. This cause, therefore, would have to be changeless and immaterial, since something can be timeless only if it is unchanging, and something can be unchanging only if it is immaterial. It does also have to be unimaginably powerful, since it it created all matter and energy, space and time.
Kenny, let me stop
Okay.
you. Let me stop you right here.
Okay. Any objections?
Well, yeah. First off, what are you reading from?
Just my argument and stuff that.
Yeah. But what's your source? Where have you gotten this argument from? Because I mean, you're reading off of a sheet of paper or a computer screen. We can tell that. So, what's the source of this argument?
What do you mean the source?
Well,
What is the
matter?
website or book that you're reading right now?
Yeah. What are you?
At the top of the page or the screen?
Yeah. Where have you gotten this argument from? First off, what's your source? Because I just want to know.
I got it from the cosmological Kalam argument, William Lane Craig.
The Kalam
That's the
Cosmological
topic,
argument.
right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's the topic, right?
All right. So did you listen to the first part of the show where I discussed some of the flaws in the argument?
No.
Okay, because that was
But
like.
did you hear? Yeah, but hold up. Did you hear what I just said though? The things that I said.
Yeah, we
Did you
did.
object?
Yeah, we heard you, but we did. The first 20 minutes or so of the show, we did talk about the Kalam Cosmological argument and discuss some of the flaws with it. So you're saying you didn't watch that part of the show? You've only just joined.
No, well, I never. It's not specifically the flaw. I'm just kind of like paraphrasing my own thing.
Okay.
So I kind of, if you want to object, could you object to what I just said though? I understand.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, yes. The point is that all that you're discussing right now are completely speculative ideas, right? You're saying in order for this to exist, it has to be this kind of thing that works in this kind of way, and it has to exist outside. And what I'm saying is, how can you back any of that up? That's your first problem. You're discussing. There has to be a source that is outside space-time, independent of space-time. It doesn't have to obey all of these rules that other things in the universe have to obey. Well, where is anything in the way of tangible evidence for that? Because essentially you are just hitting us with a lot of speculation at this point.
Well,
And,
I don't know about that.
I'm sorry?
Speculation, I don't see how. How is, okay.
You've
Big Bang model.
Yeah, you've described, you've put together a model. You have said, here is the kind of thing that I think is necessary in order for there to be a universe. Okay, but now how do you get from your model to any sort of actual tangible proof of, here, this is what this has to be, and it can't be anything else. Okay.
Well, I had like other stuff. I was getting to that. I was going to conclude that.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay, go on then, please.
Okay. I was just let's see, where should I start? Okay. I said this cause would have to be unmeasurably powerful since it created all matter and energy in space.
Okay.
And time.
Okay.
Okay. Finally, this cause would have to be personal. 2 reasons for this conclusion. The only entities we know of that are timeless and immaterial are minds and abstract objects, like numbers, or the logical absolutes, like the law of identity. Since the abstract objects don't stand on causal relations, therefore the transcendent cause for the universe would have to be a disembodied mind. Only a free agent can account for the origin of a temporal effect from a timeless cause. If the cause was a impersonal mechanical operating cause, then the cause could never exist without its effect, or if the sufficient condition of the effect is given, then the effect must be given as well.
Let's go and stop you right here.
If I can sum up.
Yeah.
Okay.
The point here is that nothing could create all the stuff in the universe except a super powerful mind. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, somewhat. I wouldn't say that.
Where did the super powerful mind come from?
Well, I was gonna. It was going to that. I'm almost done, guys.
Okay.
Can we shortcut because we've got more callers?
Let me just go ahead and let me give you some basic objections here. Okay.
Okay. Give me a text.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You want this cause to be timeless and eternal, but in order to create, it has to create within time. So please explain how something can be timeless and contingent upon time at the same time. Okay. How
Okay.
a being that exists outside space-time is not outside what we would call absolute time, where time is a series of causal events. So this God, this creative force, is not contingent upon those rules, and yet, in order to create the universe, that has to be a causal process. Creation
No.
is a causal activity.
No, if it's
How is it
timeless.
not? How is it
Because-
how is it not? Here's
How is
how
it-
creation works. Something doesn't exist.
Can I explain, or?
Well, let me clarify so that
Okay,
you give
clarify.
an answer. You can give a
Okay.
cogent answer here.
Okay, go
Here's how the act of creation works. Something doesn't exist. The creator goes, I think I'll create that thing. He creates it. Voila, it exists. That's a causal chain of events. So creation is causal. Okay. So so how do you posit a creator that is not a being that works within causality, who is outside of absolute time?
Well, because you would have to, I was just concluding and assuming that since it's timeless and its effect to begin in time is for the cause to be a personal agent, it would have to be able to freely choose to create an effect in time without determining conditions.
Well, wait a minute. You said it's going to be a personal agent. I mean, you didn't establish that. You just said it.
Did I? Or, okay, maybe. It would have, no, that's not what I said.
Yeah.
Because
No.
if it's personal, remember I said that there would have to be two entities. There would have to be a mind
Okay.
and
Why would there have to be a mind? What does a mind have to do with it? Because as far as we know, the only minds that we have direct experience with are the result of physical processes. They happen in brains, sometimes they happen in microchips, for loose definitions of the word mind. But we're not aware of any mind that exists without a space infrastructure to support it. Are you?
well, I was I'm just kind of describing through science, through the
This
conclusions
isn't
of
science.
God.
William Legge Craig is an apologist. He has never been near a
Oh.
science academy.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
See,
going-
this is it's speculation what you're engaging in.
How is it speculation?
Because what you are simply positing, this mind that must exist, that doesn't have to obey
Without a
any
brain.
rules. It doesn't have to obey any rules in particular, and
Like physical?
and so it gets to be this thing that creates a universe in the absence of any other explanation. It's essentially you're doing God of the gaps again. This is we don't have an explanation for such and such, i.e., why there's a universe.
I'm being rational. Because could I explain, please?
Okay.
Okay. The law of cause and effect. There's
Causality.
two humongous reasons. Hello?
Causality, right?
Yeah. You can't. Matter and energy just can't just cause itself, guys. That's part of science. There has to be a cause for that effect. And since there is no time,
But you don't think that there has to be a cause for this magical thing that you've invented.
well, I just explained to you that if there was no time, there was no before.
So it's not
Then
true
it's
that
timeless.
everything needs a cause.
Yeah, I mean, if causality is contingent upon time, how does a timeless being do causal things?
Because it's a mind.
And how
It's
does
why I
that
have
have
free
anything to do
will.
with
And
anything?
again, what
Abstract.
familiarity, I mean, if we're talking about things that we have experience with, what experience do you have with minds that are not stored in some physical medium?
Well, I'm just citing the law of identity. If that's what it is, then that's what it is.
You're getting
not
around
logic.
around logical objections you're making by making up stuff to which your logic doesn't apply. And
Okay.
that
Okay.
doesn't work with the rules.
See,
Okay.
I think we're running out of time though.
yeah, well,
Oh,
that is sort of.
okay.
Here's the problem with here's the problem, Kenny. First off, you're reading Craig's arguments
No, not
to us.
exactly.
Well, you're reading a version. You're reading a cosmological argument, and
Somewhat.
yeah. Well, the problem is not only do you not understand the responses that we're trying to give you, I don't think you understand the argument you're attempting to defend in the first place. You have found this argument from some sort of either apologetics website or a book that you have, and you don't even really seem to understand what it's saying. You can't pronounce half the words in it. It's a very difficult concept. These aren't meant to be easy concepts, but what you haven't thought through is basic objections. What is the difference between, how can you define time versus timelessness? How does a being that exists how can you say anything about any kind of being that works in a way that doesn't have to obey any of the rules that everything else that we have experience of and know anything about has to obey? He doesn't have to work within time, and yet he can do causal things. You know, and that's like saying it gets to be a square and a circle at the same time. These are internally contradictory ideas. But look, before you try to call us up, and we encourage you to call us up, we like talking to guys like you, but the problem is, if you want to advance an apologetics argument to us, you need to make sure that you even understand it in the first place before you can try to call up, defend it, and then understand our objections to it. Okay? So that's where your problem is. I don't even think you really understand what you're trying to defend. Okay? I mean, that's not personal, all right? I'm not trying to take. I'm just calling it like I see it. You know, you're reading this out to us. You're stumbling over a lot of it, and then when we object to bits of it, you're like, but. You see what I mean? Take some time to study this kind of stuff first.
Well, I guess I'll just call you another time.
Yeah, do that,
yeah,
please.
feel free.
Feel free.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Thanks.
Thanks for calling. We do appreciate that.
I'd like to say it was a nice try, but those are the calls that make our show fun, folks.
I'm sorry that was a little rushed, but I need to make room for an important announcement from some clown named Matt Dilla. Yeah.
Dial a porn slut. What is it?
Hey,
Hey Chief, what
Matt.
up?
I didn't call for this reason, but I'm going to say this. The conclusion of the Kalam Cosmological argument and what Kenny was presenting is always, eventually, once they narrow it down, therefore God must have created the universe. If you can substitute in for the word God, transcendental universe creating pixies, or any number of other fictional beings that you can invent.
Gus the Magic Cosmic Hippo. He's my guy.
Then your argument is useless. If you can just substitute in any kind of who's he wants it that you define as
magical thing.
filling the terms.
That was the same problem with the tag, too. I mean, even if we had been willing to grant Matt Slick every single one of his premises,
He can't get to God.
he still can't get to his God any more than Gus.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It ends up being the, okay, we don't know, so I'm going to claim that this fits the bill for what we don't know.
Yeah.
When if you'd have just stopped with we don't know, you'd have been fine.
Yeah.
But the reason that I'm calling is I have colossally bad news.
Yeah, we've heard, but yeah, they haven't. So,
And
what is
so
it?
You're wearing a bra.
I'm not.
Oh.
The
Well, we
public
just-
access,
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Told you just be comfortable with it, man. It's all good.
the public access studio where we do the show every week,
Yes.
is most likely going to be closed for the months of June, July, and August.
Oh,
Now, before everybody goes into a panic, we are going to try to do streamed shows from perhaps Dillahunty International Studios
really?
or something similar. So what I'd like to do is let people know ahead of time. We're not necessarily sure we can take phone calls. Hi, Max. And we need to set up emails that we can respond to, because otherwise it would just be boring to trying to do 90 minutes of that.
Yeah. Frank, our producer, told me this before the show went on. I groaned, and then he said, "But we're working on it." So yeah, we're at the very least going to try to do the Ustream version of the show, on Sunday afternoons, right, at the usual time.
Yeah.
And and what he said was that you were trying to work something out either through Skype or some other service to be able to take calls.
Yeah,
All the same.
we're gonna try to do that because there's no way I'm giving my home phone number out to all these
Yeah.
fans of the show. I love you all dearly, but you're not going to be calling me at home.
Yeah. But so the longest, now, is this going to start the first Sunday in June? Is that like the first day of the off the air for?
That's in like 3 weeks, I think.
Yeah, Joe and them will get more details, and over the next couple weeks of the show, we'll be putting it out and giving as much information as we can.
And we'll
Keep
be
an eye
putting
on the website, folks.
put
and
out,
the
and
blog.
updates on the blog too, and all the rest of it,
Yeah,
just to let
blog.
everyone know.
Watch the blog.
And, okay. So never fear, somehow AETV will still be here.
And worst case, we'll come back like with a vengeance in September.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll
I
do like a
mean-
9-hour show. that will just rule. Yeah.
It's not like other shows don't get like the entire summer season off. I mean, Dollhouse is ending. Come on.
Well, that's...
Yeah, but one of my favorite...
Well, that means we could probably get Eliza Dushku for cheap to come.
Hey!
Yeah. Get Agent on the phone right now.
Yeah, what is her rate anyway?
So we'll find out. It's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, anyway.
But one of my favorite claims is typically that, hey, we do more shows than on regular TV. We don't take off for the summer, and it looks like we may partially take off for the summer. But
Right, that's true. On the other hand, we don't do any prep at all. I
Yeah.
mean, except for setting up the studio.
So you should hang up on me rudely
Okay.
and take another caller.
We don't. We would love to, but we
We'd
don't
love to.
have
Yeah,
any
you've
other
intimidated
callers.
everyone.
However,
all of our callers have fled. Come on,
you
there's 10 minutes
suck.
on the show.
So,
So
last
Oh,
chance.
no.
Bye.
yeah. So there. That'll put that in your pipe and smoke it.
We have 10 minutes left, and we don't have any other callers. Our
Okay.
good friend Mark is
Yeah.
Mark Lowy is holding up a sign, which I guess I haven't had time to ethically think about if I should read, but Mark might be running for school board again.
Our State Board of Education, or
Yes, and he's
yeah.
a personal friend, and that
There he
doesn't
is.
mean that we're telling
Good
you to
man.
vote for him or anything
No.
like that, because we would not do that on public.
Well, that's what we're
radio.
talking about, is the reason that the State Board of Education in Texas has been able to find itself packed to the rafters
Yes.
with young Earth creationists and other far
Because
right
nobody
wing.
pays attention to school board.
That's right. That's
elections.
and the religious right has been aware of that. The Democratic Party completely ignores those elections because
Yeah.
they want to set their sights on higher stuff, Senate, House, what have you, and so they have been able to get these YEC people onto these boards. And even the Republican voters voting for them don't necessarily know who these folks are because they're counting on people who just vote straight Republican ticket to
Right.
get them in half the time
Luckily,
too.
Mark happens to be a Republican.
Yes, and luckily.
Just much more of an intelligent one.
And this is what's so funny about Dan McElroy getting, boy, well, we got the calls coming in now. We told everybody to, call us, fine. When, getting raked over the coals and being told you've created this horrible hornet's nest, the State Board of Education and the chairman of that board, that's not supposed to be this position where you make incredibly embarrassing waves and become the subject of jokes of late night comedians, right? I mean, that's supposed to be this real invisible sort of thing that gets done. Well, because of all the craziness of the creationists on the state board, now there are more candidates who are out there who are more progressive, more pro-science, saying, yeah, okay, I think we'll get candidates. I'll either run myself or we'll find someone to support to actually run against these people next time, which hasn't been done. So that's been a good thing.
Okay.
So, I'm done. I'm all done.
I would like to get to this news real quick, and
ahead.
my advance apologies because our audience does span the entire political spectrum, but when I hear politicians doing crummy things, I want to criticize them, and when I hear politicians doing good things, I want to go out of my way to praise them. And so unabashedly, evangelical, did you know that last week was the National Day of Prayer?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I heard something to that effect. It
Yes.
didn't really seem to. I mean, the world didn't suddenly become beautiful all at once. So.
Evangelical author and radio host James Dobson said that he is disappointed that for the first time in nearly 2 decades there was no representative from the White House during the National Day of Prayer event. Aww. James Dobson is disappointed.
You mean we actually have a president in the White House who respects the concept of separation of church and state? Gosh.
Dobson said, I have not asked to meet with the president and certainly is not asked to meet with me, but I would just like this country to remember its foundation, to remember its heritage and honor it, especially on the day set aside by George Washington in the beginning for prayer in this country, he said, and I would hope that that would have occurred. Dobson and his wife were organizers of a 4-hour program on Capitol Hill marking the nationwide day designated by Congress as a day of prayer, which brought together members of Congress, military leaders, ministers, and an NFL star.
Yeah, because, you got to get
you'll recall that the National Day of Prayer was a big freaking fuss at the White House every year that that last guy was president.
Yeah, so pandering to the base.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry, James Dobson.
And why do you need a National Day of Prayer, Christians? I mean, can't you just like
pray every day?
Yeah. I mean, and you know, isn't that what like going to church on Sundays for? Don't you have, you know, pray over your meals and before you go? Why do you need this? I've always I never really understood why so many people on the religious right think that their religion needs
Special
the
recognition.
recognition by the government to be you know, this important thing.
Also, really quick, I got time for one last caller, and oh gosh.
Yeah, let's do it. We can just put that on the blog.
But also, President Barack Obama faces a Republican backlash over his plans to scrap one of the most divisive policies left over from the Bush era, education programs for teenagers that promote only sexual abstinence.
Right, because they fail. Right. So.
Yeah. So
talk about that more on the blog.
I will post that on the blog.
Yes,
and then we're being urged to rush to line 2. So you got like 2 minutes. Damien in Chicago.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
How's it going?
Hi. Hey, what's up, guys? I've never really seen the show before, but my friend told me to call in and tell you. Just like to say that I know God personally, and I'd like to tell you about him.
Oh,
Okay.
good. I think he owes me $20. Can you take care of that? He's hard to get on the phone. I mean, it's just like, you know.
Well, yeah, he doesn't really own a telephone, you know.
Yeah.
You don't get good reception in heaven.
Doesn't he own everything?
But
yeah. Anyway,
you know, it's too high for all the satellites, I guess.
Okay.
might be. Yeah. All
How
right.
how much time do we actually have left on the show?
We have like 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll just call in next week because I have a lot to say.
I think you should do that.
Do that, please,
Do you
yeah.
want to say anything quickly before we're off the air? Or we're just going to have to take one more caller if you don't.
All right. Well, I'd just like to say that God loves you both.
Okay. Thanks.
Appreciate that.
I know it doesn't mean much to you, but
Okay.
you know he does.
Well, I know it means a lot to you, so thanks.
We appreciate that. where's my $20
all
then?
right, I'm going to take George in New York, who always gets the post show, but he's never on live. And George, you have like a minute and a half now.
Hi, Russell. Hi, Martin.
How
Hi,
you doing?
George.
2 things real quick. Number 1, as you know, Russell, I myself am a conservative.
I'm aware.
You go ahead and thump those people as much as they badly need thumping. You don't need
you,
to
George.
apologize for it. When they're wrong, they're wrong.
Yay.
In fact, I'm just looking at Bad Astronomy, Phil Plate's blog, and I noticed that the Texas State Board of Education held hearings during which they took votes, among other things, on the age of the universe and whether or not the universe was expanding. If
Yeah,
you
so
go
I
to
think
Bad
you can just sort of
Astronomy,
vote reality to change if you don't like the way it is.
well, you know what the worst thing is? Apparently reality lost.
That's always a
It
shame
usually
when that
does with those people. Reality lost with those people a long time ago.
What I want to know is, where are my fellow Republicans screaming for recounts now?
They're, yeah, it's the base. They were sort of like, oh, well, the base likes this stuff.
Oh,
Also-
look at that. There's the credits. Yes,
Yeah,
quick,
second
quick,
thing
quick.
real quick.
Real quick.
That thing with Kenny just now, I think I actually lost IQ points listening to that.
I'm sorry.
Would you
The
like
hazard
me?
of the show.
Would you like me to pretend to be a theist and call in sometime so I can at least do the spiel because I know
Do
it?
something intelligent. Yeah, maybe sometime.
At some
gotta
point.
go.
All right, take care.
Threadgills. We haven't mentioned Threadgills in a while, but after the show.
Sean, email us.
Yeah, Sean, email us and
Bye.
Bye.